Right that the earth is mine. Burn bright, let the ember shine. You know I'm gonna get it every time. Champion, wearing the crown. I can see my name in lights. Spark from the heart and it shines so bright. Yeah, let the whole world know. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
This episode is brought to you by SPI Logistics, the premier freight agent logistics firm in North America. For over 40 years, SPI has been diligently building the most successful freight agent network to provide first-class relationships for our shippers, receivers, and carrier partners. We are more than another transportation network. We are a dedicated team of professionals united by one singular purpose, and that is to expedite our agents' success. All of our agents are set up for success on day one, as they are provided with a full suite of support staff that is ready to assist them with everything from after-hours emergencies to financial and administrative needs on a no-fee basis. This way, you can focus on continuing to grow your business. There is no financial risk to start, and you have the ability to earn up to 75% in commissions. If you are looking to take control of your financial future and build your business with the backing of one of the most successful logistics firms in North America, visit www.spi3pl.com to learn more. Do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Coffee with the Freight Coach. My name is Chris Jolly. I am your host, and I am the Freight Coach. Before we jump into the episode, as always, you guys, thank you so much for coming out and listening to this podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak to transportation professionals, you guys, because at the end of the day, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve. So you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. I do have one small favor to ask. I know you're going to get value out of this episode, but if you do and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. Share it out there to your network, because if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. All right, I got a very special guest for you guys here today. I always love talking to founders out there, and selfishly, it's because I'm a young entrepreneur and I don't know what is, going to happen in the future. I just know that I got to work really, really hard every single day just to keep my head above water. And I always like talking to individuals who are further along the path than me, who've been through, they've been acquired, or, maybe they've made some mergers and stuff like that. And my guest today embodies all of that. So I got Mr. Drew McElroy here. He is the co-founder of Transfix. So Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
Chris, it's a pleasure, man. Thanks very much for having me.
No, I'm looking forward to this, man. Like we literally, it's been 7 minutes since you jumped on the call here, and I can already tell we're gonna have a great conversation just based on the interactions.
Yeah, man. Well, you know how it goes when you get a bunch of freight people together. It either goes really well or really badly. But I'm gonna stick with the really well part of things. At the end of the day, most of us are just dorks, right? So I can talk about this stuff all day long. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm appreciative of the invite.
No, absolutely, man. So, dude, how did you get your start in transportation, Drew? What brought you into this industry? So
there's a picture of me that I have shown to a few people and told them that they cannot share under penalty of death. But I have the story that most people have. I'm a lifer. The picture I'm referencing is me behind the wheel of a truck at 18 months old. With my father had started a trucking company by the name of Andrews Express, which obviously is my full name. So I've been literally around freight since I was born. Yeah. And then my dad, like a lot of other folks, found out how hard owning assets can be, and he. Somewhat like Transfix, changed his approach, his business model when I was about 5 years old. And he started an old school one-man freight brokerage out of the spare bedroom of our house. So I literally grew up listening to him cover loads and all the stories that go along with that. Like, oh, baseball practice is canceled. Well, guess who's making delivery appointments to Walmart today, despite being, 9 years old and whatnot. So I was around it my whole life. And as is often the case, I thought I wanted nothing to do with it. I was fortunate. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I went to the business school at Georgetown. And as you sort of do, I thought I was super cool and I was going to go work in finance or, something like that, consulting. And then I had this epiphany that I should not do that. And I should pitch my old man about joining the family brokerage upon graduation. So I I graduated on a Saturday, and on Monday I was employee number 3 of the family brokerage, and my dad was employee number 1, and by that point my mom was employee number 2. And my dad said, "Okay, kid, you want to learn? Well, it's no more delivery appointments. Like, here's a list of leads." And I started as a cradle to grave broker, wearing a headset at 22 years old, and working for my dad and getting yelled at by my dad every day. So that was my indoctrination. Welcome to the space, kid.
Dude, that is how many other kids that graduated from Georgetown went into freight brokerage? Just
I think I'm the only one who has that particular problem with my brain,
yeah,
or that opportunity, depending on how you want to look at it, right? Because obviously we're a unique community, and yeah, man. I mean, like it was full send from day one, right? That's the only way to do this, and so I spent about 4 years there, driving my parents crazy. Because as anyone who knows me will tell you, like I can't really sit still, right? Like there's so much opportunity in this business, and I feel like somewhat compelled to constantly push the envelope. And my, again, old school family brokerage, my parents were like, "Hey, this is kind of our retirement plan here. Could you knock it off?"
Yeah.
And ultimately it was that led me to say, okay, there's some pretty grand ambition here, but maybe my family's very nice, but otherwise, pretty small. 3PL was maybe not the launch pad that I was looking for. And so that ultimately led me down the path of meeting a whole bunch of folks. But one of them ultimately was my partner, Jonathan Salama, who, at the time, right, I had a lot of opinions and ideas about how we can do this all collectively in a better way. But I'm not an engineer, right? So I could describe them, but I couldn't build them. And so when John and I came together, it was pretty great, I think, for both of us, because that was we combined sort of the knowledge of how the industry works and maybe ideas about how it should work with world-class skills and experience in actually building solutions to do things in the real world. And that's been our story now for going on 10 years.
How much hustle is required to work in freight? Because I think like that's one of the most common misconceptions out there, Drew, I think like it's almost the facade is that, oh, you just call a couple of customers and then you just bid on all this freight and then you're a millionaire. And I think people highly, highly underestimate how much work is required to get in the door with somebody. And then, because like I try and tell people all the time, Drew, I'm like, selling's the easy part. And like fundamentally, when it boils down to it, selling's the easy part. It's the execution of like, we're literally, as we speak right now, Drew, inside of my brokerage, we had a customer hit us up right now that needed to get a power only option to come in and move a trailer that was dropped in the fire lane on their property. We have that going on right now. We also have a customer that's coming to us with a level 12 emergency to get some hazmat containers removed from the port last minute because somebody dropped the ball out there. And these are all like within the first couple of loads of doing anything with these customers. And, to me, it's like that level of hustle and understanding. I think it's not understood well what is required to get these things off the ground.
Yeah. I mean, I think your examples are funny in that they're very classic, but they're also never the same, right? Yeah. Like that's the thing about freight is it's like, it's never a dull moment, right? And like this industry is, in my experience, with all respect, it's decidedly not for everyone, right? Like the pace and the general nonstop insanity, it really goes one way or the other. Like I've joked about this for years, right? Like you can tell on day one, right? Like if you come in at like a new class of reps, right? Totally green, and you're shadowing for the sake of, example, like you're shadowing a senior broker, right? And you're just learning, right? And the senior broker says, "Oh, excuse me for 1 second. I have to take this call," right? And so now you're just sort of sitting there twiddling your thumbs, for 30 seconds on day one. And the phone on your desk rings, right? Like to me, it's sort of like the bifurcating, are you going to make it or not, right? Because there's two types of people. There's the person who looks at the ringing phone like a poisonous snake and says, I don't know what to do, right? And there's the person who looks at it and picks it up and says, "Thank you for calling Transfix. This is Drew. How can I help you?" Right? And I may not know the details, but I have the engagement, right? I'm switched on and ready to go.
Yeah.
You have to be switched on in this industry, or you're just never going to make it, right? Because it's too dynamic, it's too constant, and the people that you're ultimately competing with are killers, right? Like if you have a significant book of freight business, there's a reason for that, and you've worked your butt off to get it, and it's presumably funding your family's livelihood. So you will protect it the way a person protects their livelihood, and that involves treating it with respect, right? So to answer your question, I think the hustle and the sort of like energy, and like how everybody in freight is, right? Like it's a weird business, right? Because we're all very serious about it, but then there's also the sort of like personal dynamism too. You don't want to do business with somebody that you don't trust, and you can't pick up the phone. Technology is wonderful, but if I can't pick up the phone and talk to my partner in a way that I know we're on the same page, that's a problem too, right? So the list of requirements is not insubstantial, right? But the sort of trade-off is when you get it, there's how many examples of there are people who have done well by their family, like in a generational way from freight, and that's the opportunity, but everybody wants it.
Yeah. No, man. So you get going with Transfix, the co-founder of that. What were the early days of Transfix like, man? What was it like when you guys just started? Was it started out of the bedroom, or how did this all roll?
So there was actually a number of bedrooms. It's funny that you say it that way. The one of the things that we joked about in the early days was the number of offices we had, because of how scrappy it was, right? And we started the company because we're extra gluttons for punishment. We started the company in Manhattan, which is obviously not an easy or low cost place to have an office. So,
right.
So yeah, the company was literally started in a bunch of different living rooms, and then in the first, I think, 6 years, I think we had 9 offices, including one that was condemned shortly after we left the building, and so it was an interesting spatial experience, certainly. From a business perspective, the early days were great. To be totally candid, there is a purity about starting something, whether it's a pure tech business or it's a freight business, or in our case, obviously both. But there's you've just raised a little bit of capital, a bunch of, fairly or very sophisticated people have taken a leap of faith with you. You've made all these promises, and now they're like, okay, cool, go do it, kid. And it's like, oh, right, here we go, right? And so in the early days, it was myself and Jonathan and a small team of incredibly devoted people. And it was quite simple. The mandate was straightforward. My job was to win freight and to ultimately handle the sort of commercial and operational side of the business, right? Like, I'm a believer that our industry is demand led, which is to say, you got to get the loads first, right? You can't get the carriers without the loads. The carriers aren't going to care, right? But it was, win customers, win carriers with the customers, and, go baby go, right? Because, especially in the early days, the amount of ability you have to influence the trajectory of your company via numbers is incredibly significant, because the numbers are all small, right? We did 30 loads last month. We did 90 this month. Holy shit, right? Like, that's 300% growth. Down the road, you're not going to be able to get 300% growth, right? But in the early days, you can have this outsized, exponential looking impact. And depending on what your business strategy is, I mean, it almost doesn't matter, right? No matter who you are, that kind of growth is a good thing. But in the case of, a business like ours, where we had both grand ambition and the need for additional capital from investors to realize that vision, that growth was incredibly important to us.
Would you, to kind of talk about capital from investors, would you advise people to take on capital after a certain point in business, or would it be wise to have somebody take it right away before they start? And I'm asking that because my opinion now, because I'm just over 4 years of being in business here, Drew, and I don't think I could have properly allocated the funds if I would have taken on capital right away. But now I think after a couple of years, with my business acumen being what it is, I'm not a genius or anything like that, but I feel like if somebody was like, hey, we're going to give you $10 million, I wouldn't go out and do anything stupid with it, right? Like I would actually use it to build my business in a way that I feel like would be beneficial for long-term growth.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's very difficult to give a specific answer in sort of a vacuum, right? Because I think ultimately the answer is entirely dependent, not even on the company. I mean, the company is very important, but it actually to me goes one step further. It's really about the founders or the whomever owns the equity of the company and what their goals are.
Mhm.
And how, I think the best way to say it is what their goals are, because I guess there's a couple of things about that. Firstly, you sort of framed it as should you take capital at the beginning or later. I would suggest that there's a step before that, which is should we take capital at all?
Yeah.
Because taking other people's money is a trade-off. It's inherently a trade-off that now you're not the solo steward of your own ship, right? Because you now have a fiduciary obligation to other people, which changes a lot of things very quickly, right? And it changes the expectations and it changes how you have to view the world, right? Because if it's your business, you can make decisions that you think are right, right? If you are running a business on behalf of shareholders, of course you do things that you think are right, but there's I would say a narrower path of how to get there once other people's money and therefore expectations and your fiduciary responsibility come into play. So I think that's the first question. And I would suggest that candidly, there has to be a very good reason, or else honestly, I would say, bootstrap it, right? Like keep going as far as you can on your own. Because even if you eventually have to raise capital, the further you've made it before you raise it, not only is there that, you're smarter, right? Hopefully we're all smarter versions of our previous self, right? And like,
Yeah.
I find that like looking back on anything I've ever done, I feel like hopelessly naive, right? As an old guy now, I'm like, oh my God. So there's always that. But there's also the component that your business will, as it makes progress, not only will you know it better, but it'll be inherently more valuable, which will make the raising capital process both just easier to do because it's really hard, but it will also allow you to have more leverage in that negotiation, right? When you're raising capital, it's very, very important to always think about leverage, right? Because investors are very smart. They're professionals. Their job is to get the best deal on behalf of their investors, right? So they have a fiduciary too. And their fiduciary often involves squeezing your head as hard as they can, right? And so your job is to be able to, bat their hands away, right? And that comes with leverage and optionality, right? And it takes different forms in different businesses. So I can't be too specific because it depends on who you are and what you want to accomplish. But I always think about it in sort of in that way. I think that's the best way to frame that.
No, absolutely, man. I think like this is a battle that a lot of people go into because it's like there's so many people that are, they're boasting about, oh, we're raising all this capital, but then you see the after effect of a lot of these large cap raises a few years after the fact. And, these are just thoughts that kind of come to mind. Like this is the stuff that I think about when I'm not, trying to build my businesses is when I'm at home, I'm like, well, dang, maybe I should take on investment. And then I look at some of the recent case studies, especially in our industry. I'm like, there's companies out there that have raised hundreds of millions, if not almost like $1 billion, and they're gone. And I'm wondering, why was that? Was it because they raised too quick? Maybe they didn't know the industry as well as they thought they did. I know there's a lot of external factors, but like those are just kind of things that go through my head. And because I have bootstrapped everything, Drew, up to this point, right? And I look at it as like, I'm just going to continue to bootstrap at this point, unless somebody for some reason comes to me and says, hey, we're going to give you $100 million and we want no equity in your business, or say, we just love you that much, which I don't think that exists.
If you meet that person, can you give them my number? Like I would love to meet them. Yeah, no, I think it's right, man. Right. Because like, these companies are our babies, right? And like, not to be like overly like silly or metaphorical about it, but it's true, right? Like we give birth to them and then we put all of our sort of energy and soul into them, especially in the early days, right? And then then they become teenagers and they like go off on their own and they yell at you or whatever, right? But like the early days, it's super personal, and I think when you take on outside capital, you limit your optionality, right? Like again, if it's just your business, you get to go at the speed and pace you want, and you get to make decisions that are not purely capitalism driven, right? Like, of course, we're all capitalists, we're here to make money, but there are lifestyle trade-offs that go with that individual owners get to think about. Once you start taking outside capital, it's like, no, there's only one path here, and it's up.
Yeah.
And that is part of the reason, again, without talking about anybody specifically, right? But like investors, generally speaking, make many investments.
Yeah.
And they don't want singles for the most part. They want home runs. And so their risk tolerance at the individual company level is often going to be very different than a founder who has put, again, all of their blood, sweat, and tears into this. And investors are like, yeah, that's cool and all, but like, we got to exit by doing X, Y, and Z, or else this is not what we signed up for. And so there can be friction there, depending on what the founder wants to do. So I think it's just very important to go in very eyes wide open and very deliberate about what you're raising the capital for, right? Like if you can very clearly articulate, hey, if I bring in, to use your numbers, right? If I bring in this $10 million, I can use that in the next 18 months to create $100 million in value, right? Like I can 10x this in 18 months. If that's really true, well then like shit, okay, like maybe we should take the 10 million, right? But like again, it's about being deliberate and why are we doing this and what are we going to do with it?
Yeah. And I think like, it's also looking at what all of your financing options are. Maybe it is taking out, maybe you get a line of credit from a bank and you start there and kind of build it up. I just think that there's a lot of options out there. And I think so many people silo themselves in thinking, oh, I got this napkin idea. I got to go get venture funding or I got to go get private equity to buy into this stuff. And it's like, no, I think there's a lot of value in getting your face absolutely beat in for a couple of years to get a better feeling of do you actually want this? Because this life, man, and going out there, and this isn't just a transportation thing, this is a business thing in general. If you're going to go out and try and carve your own piece of the American dream, you better be willing to put in way more than you think. And it's not as easy as just going out there and raising a little bit of money and thinking that you got it all figured out, because like this is big stakes. There are people who throw literal billions of dollars out there that they have investments and stuff like that. And yeah, man, they need their money back.
It's all very serious. There's no doubt about it. And like, of course, from an outside perspective, there's always things that like, go wrong or like don't make sense when they happen, right? So like I can appreciate that people are sometimes like, like, oh my God, like let's go compete with these guys, right? But like the reality is, in my experience at least, the vast majority of investors and anyone really, like the world is a competitive place, right? And so anything that you want, you're gonna have to win. And I don't necessarily mean it's not like purely dog eat dog. You don't have to go take it from somebody in that sort of sense, but you have to have a reason to exist. You have to have a way that you move the needle for people to actually, give a damn, right? And like again, it's a big, big world out there, and there's a lot of smart people doing a lot of clever things, right? So to cut through that noise and capture not only one person's attention, but a lot of people's attention, it better be good, or it's going to be hard. I mean, it's going to be hard anyway. And if it's not good, it's going to be, next to impossible.
Hey guys, before we go any further in this episode, I wanted to let you know it is brought to you by Denim. As a business owner myself, I personally know the importance of financial stability and preserving cash flow to help navigate through any freight market. With Denim's comprehensive service offering, you now have an all-in-one financial partner whose platform includes factoring, payments, freight audit, document collection management, and analytics, which help keep your business financially healthy and increase your team's time to focus on revenue-producing activities. You can also take advantage of Denim's free credit check, which they perform on all of your customers. And Denim will proactively reach out to you if they spot any signs of credit deterioration. Finally, Denim always pays your carriers first. As a broker, this is imperative to preserving your credit score in the market, which ultimately helps you become a broker of choice to your carrier partners. Are you ready to learn more? Visit denim.com to schedule a demo today. Just do me a favor and let them know that the Freight Coach sent you. So, you've been in this industry, it sounds like about the same time frame as I have. And we know what this world was like pre-technology, when you had to fax rate confirmations over and stuff like that. And
I still remember the curly paper faxes. Like that's
yeah.
how old I am.
And it's like I look at it like this, Drew, because you guys recently pivoted in your business a little bit, and you guys are very. I mean, anybody can go out there and Google the news article if you guys want to find out more about that in particular. Unless you want to talk about that a little bit, but I would like to focus in on where you guys are now. And with data and everything else that's out there, do you think that most transportation companies are not using data, misunderstanding their data, or are using it but aren't really applying it the way that they should?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So what I will say is our mission at Transfix from the very beginning, right? Like I appreciate what you said about before tech and after tech, right? But like, even if our industry in an old school way had a little bit of like, Luddite-esque behavior, right? There's always been technology. Like you mentioned, a fax machine qualifies as technology, right? It's better than a carrier pigeon, right? So the way we've always looked at it is that maybe technology wasn't applied as robustly as it could have been in our vision, right? I mean, that was when we founded Transfix, that was sort of the whole point, right? And maybe the idea of naming the business Transfix as in we're going to fix all this. Maybe there's a little bit of arrogance in that, but there was just a naming, right?
I love it.
and I think like at the core of it, right? It's like anybody who's touched this space knows how big it is and just how like frustrating it can be. And most of that frustration manifests itself in waste of one form or another, right? Whether it's in the real world waste of like drivers, sitting or deadheading or like, whatever, all the stuff that leaving trailers in the fire lane, as you mentioned earlier in the call, right? There's always just real world, crap, so to speak, right? And then within a brokerage, the folks who are actually trying to manage all of this, right? There's also a lot of inefficiency, right? Whether it's faxing a rate confirmation and waiting for some, guy in an office to sign it and fax it back, or, that's obviously a very old school issue, but like just the stuff, right? And anybody who's ever, again, worked in a brokerage knows the good loads still have a bunch of paperwork associated with them. And like, God forbid, when something goes wrong, like we know how long we're going to spend, right? Yeah. And so our mission from the beginning, which for the record has not changed, was to use new applications of technology to improve this in one form or another, right? Like either in the real world, via intelligent matching or whatever it might be to eliminate dwell and eliminate deadhead, or to increase the speed at which brokers can process a load, right? Which is to say, lower variable cost, right? Like attack the P&L. So that is, as everybody knows, like that has been what we have been talking about for a very long time. What has changed recently at Transfix ultimately is the business model with which we deploy these solutions. So historically, as probably everybody knows, we were an actual broker, right? We were selling services to move freight to shippers, and we would use the platform that has all of this wonderful enabling technology, right? And the carriers, frankly, would interact with it as much, if not more, than the shippers, right? Accepting loads, tracking, trace, et cetera, et cetera. What we've sort of like realized in the last year is that the fastest way to so I kind of look at it as infrastructure, right? Like it's the pipes of moving freight in the most efficient way. It looks like utilities, right? So in order to get that software where it needs to be, what I think one of the things that makes us very unique is that it was built alongside the brokerage, right? So we can literally talk to all of the modules and features and tools that we've built. And like almost every one of them has like a funny anecdote. It's like, oh, wait, this shipper was doing this. And so we built this tool, and then it sort of grew into this like larger concept. And now it, powers the business, right? And so once we got to the point where those tools were mature, it's like, well, how do you go as fast as possible? Is it by building the brokerage, right, and continuing to like have hand-to-hand combat and win one shipper at a time, and do frankly all of the things that a brokerage is required to do that isn't really like related to sort of our core mission of building tools, right? Like, AP and AR and, claims and insurance and all this stuff, right? Like, as we all know, those things are hard and capital intensive, and they weren't really directly relevant to the sort of value creation that we sort of exist to provide. So anyway, all of that notwithstanding, as well as some like, Dave Browering at NFI has been using the phrase freight karma, which I think is appropriate. Like, this sort of all came together. And, from our perspective, it's a way that we can bring more of these tools to a larger percentage of the freight industry more rapidly, right? Because now we don't have to compete with all of these brokers with whom we have been competing for a very long time. We now exist to serve them, right? It's like, listen, we've got these tools, and we think, frankly, that they're, quite powerful, and the value they create is quite self-evident. And, with all humility, I don't think there's much like this out there in general. Like, we've done a pretty deep dive, and we've talked to a lot of folks, and I think that they're, like I say, powerful and unique, which is a pretty, from our perspective, candidly, good place to be. And so that's why we're doing this the way that we are now, because enabling all of these brokers is, you can imagine, it's the problems that we're serving are the problems that we have been thinking about every day for 10 years, and they're not unique, right? Like, every broker has to deal with some version of the same BS, right? And it's like, well, like I said, we've got some pretty good tools, so, right? So let's talk about it. And at least, knock on wood, so far so good. The conversations we've been having since we've, it's weird even for my own brain, right? Like, I've spent my long time like, these folks are our competitors, and now it's like, no, we're not. We can all do this together. I've had to retrain myself to think about it that way, but it's actually incredibly empowering, because everybody wants to do better. So,
yeah, man, I think that with where we are, with the ability through technology that is out there right now, I think that, because from my perspective, as I grow and scale my company out, I want to leverage my team with the right technology to maximize their outputs. And that's not for me as the business owner to make as much money as possible. It's for them to be as efficient as possible and for them to make as much as possible, because I don't believe in cap commissions for sales reps. Like, I've gone on record saying that, and I'm never going to cap my sales reps. And if I do, sue me, like, it's like that would be, I wouldn't be myself if I ever did that. And I think that, with where we are right now, I think a lot of brokers are, I think most people have too much technology. They have too much that they don't necessarily need for what they're actually trying to accomplish, because I think it's been death by tech stack for a lot of companies, because they thought like, oh, if I sign up for this service and this service and this service and this service, we're going to get all of this. And now they're locked into contracts. And they're like, wait a second, I don't need 90% of what I got. So like, are you guys going in there and assessing what brokers have and or trying to like connect them all and be like the back office API that actually makes all of these systems talk?
So it depends a little bit on the individual company to whom we're speaking, right? So for the most part, or not even for the most part, I think I can just say this objectively, right? Like, we want to be easy to work with and easy to partner with. Right. And as you said, right, like, technological decisions at a brokerage are obviously critical, but also kind of complicated, right? There's a lot of politics within a brokerage, and different folks have different opinions, et cetera, right? It's funny that you mentioned what you did about commissions, right? Because sometimes people get sensitive about that. It's like, well, what is this going to do? Like, is this going to somehow upset my Apple Card, and now all of a sudden, I personally am taking a hit because of this tool, right? And so I think, specifically talking about us, we have gone out of our way to ensure that our outputs are aligned with the objectives of the people to whom we're outputting them, right? Like, and not to put too fine a point on it, right? But like, at the end of the day, literally everything we've built directly maps to your P&L. And because what we built is module, it's not a full rip and replace, right? Like, we don't need to come in and start messing around with what you're doing today, right? Like it starts with, tell me what is causing you problems, right? And like, of course, we can help you with this, right? Because we've got all of the data. Like to me, it all breaks down to the life cycle of a shipment, right? It starts all the way back at pricing, whether it's an RFP for contract pricing or spot pricing, and it moves all the way through the individual steps, right? Like pricing, tender acceptance, scheduling, matching and booking and covering, right? Like track and trace, and then even like the document management and the AP and the AR, right? Like that's how these things flow. And a good broker is what makes a good broker, right? Well, you're able to optimize on the front end. You're able to win as many loads at the right price as possible. You're winning the right loads so that you don't find a high percentage of them being underwater, right? So you got the top of the P&L in terms of the freight you're winning at the price you're winning and the rate you're paying the carriers. You got to get that right, right? You got to win as many loads as you possibly can. But then you need to actually move the loads, right? And it doesn't really matter if you make, take around numbers, right? If you make 15% gross margin, but then you spend 6 hours babysitting that load, guess what? You really didn't make that much money, right? Because your cost to move it is going to be hundreds of dollars in terms of labor and everything else, right? And so from our perspective, it's tell us what you're doing today. We can help you, but you probably know where your pain points are, right? Oh, I've got this customer, they've got this crazy contract, and it's one load a week, or it's 52 annual, but they think that means 35 in the week of July 4th, right? And the reps, they're so busy they don't even realize it. They see loads come over, they get excited, and they just accept all of them, right? And now we've got a problem because we're underwater on all these loads on our board in a lane we don't use. Or it's I'm constantly overpaying carriers, right? Like we have tools that map to each of these individual problems, and it's like, how can we start by plugging them in a way that meets you where you are, right? So maybe it's using the UI that you've already got, and we're just, using data to come in, right? Or maybe it's, one screen that one team uses through the flow. Maybe it's the scheduling tool and you have your schedulers use that, right? But like, to me, it's always mapping it back to the economics of the decision makers, right? And that is usually multiple constituencies, but it's like, who owns the business? And who owns the business, right? Like the equity of the entire brokerage, and then there's no matter how you're set up, right? There's somebody in there that is owning from a commission basis the business as well, right? And it's how their interests should be aligned, right? Like the owner wants to make more money. He or she wants the P&L to look better at the end of the year, right? Bigger top line, less COGS, less processing cost, more profit, right? More free cash at the end of the day. Well, if we're doing this correctly, that person's high comp, high commission people should have a similar objective, right? Like you run a pod. Well, how many loads did your pod do last year? How much revenue did your pod do? Or how much, gross profit or net profit did your pod do? Well, if we improve those numbers, will you make more money? Most likely the answer is yes. Well, then if so, our tools are for you too, right? Like, and it's literally, again, how are you measuring it? Well, we're measuring it by, loads per person per day. Well, if software can make that number grow by 33%, because the time you're doing each individual thing goes down significantly, and you have tools to bid on more loads and win more loads, that's pretty good, right? That's what software is supposed to do. It's not supposed to be, another stupid system. I got to go in there and enter all this. Like, if the value isn't self-evident, then the value probably doesn't exist. And I guess, at least, speaking selfishly from our perspective, we don't have any of that. Like, there's nothing in there that's just sort of like, oh, it's just a thing, right? It's like, no, if it's there and I'm pitching it to you, like, there is underlying data as to how this will improve your business in a measurable way. Like we talk about, like, it's ROI positive from day one. And if that's not true and you don't realize that, then we've done something wrong, and it's probably not going to work, right? Because if the software is not paying for itself, why are you have it?
Yeah.
And at least in our case, it's, so far so good.
I look at it like this. Like, I'm in a unique position as I grow and scale my company, because like when I say I want to give my people the right technology to maximize their outputs to maximize their own earnings, I'm in a unique position where it's like, I look at technology like this, Drew, because like back in the day where, a lot of companies, they hire 25, 30 people and they know only like 3 are going to make it long term, right? Maybe if they're lucky. I want to eliminate hiring classes. And if I only need to hire 3 people, I'm going to hire the right 3 people, and I'm going to arm them with an arsenal of stuff to be successful. Because I think like I don't ever want, and again, like it's easy for me to say this because like I'm not looking down the barrel of should I hire 25 people or not, right? And I want to try and take this approach as I grow and scale in the right way to where it's like, hey, instead of hiring 10, hoping 5 make it, I just want to hire the right 5, give them the right tools, and then maybe hire 10 more later on in the year, but it's 10 people that I know are going to be needed in the long term. Instead of, I see a lot out there, man, of as the market's, peaks and valleys of it, it's like hire, oh, mass layoffs, hire, oh, mass layoffs. I want, and again, this is a lot of pie in the sky mentality, but like, I want to do the right thing and hire the right people as I grow and scale.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the right way to look at it, right? Like our job, as I see it, as founders and executives, like my job these days is no longer to be like, I'm not a broker, right? I haven't covered a load in years, right? Like my job is to build a team that can fulfill our mission, right? Whether that's executing freight or building software to do it. Our job is to build an amazing team and enable them, right? And that's where the tooling comes in, right? Historically, to your point, the survival rate in brokerage is incredibly low. And it's because like, it's this sort of dark art, right? Like you need to be able to do, especially if you're like a cradle to grave broker who like aspires to like own a pod and you've got to do all of this, right? Like it's incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And people burn out and everything else, right? And so that, again, that's where we look at it. We're like, listen, we're not here. I'll give you a good example, right? Like I've seen a lot of folks, they get worried when you start talking about pricing. Because they're like, no, you're not coming anywhere near my pricing, right? Like I own the pricing, which means I control the revenue and the win rate and my margin. And that's how I like earn my living, right? And so you start talking about automated pricing and I start going, what if you get it wrong, right? It's a very legitimate concern that I think anybody who's like earning a commission off of a book has to think about. So we have a tool that's called Rate Coach, and it's literally data infused coaching the load level. So you're on the phone with a carrier. You literally, it knows the lane you're talking about, and it's giving you guardrails. It's giving you suggestions. Hey, here's what the cost looks like. Here's what the market looks like on the pricing side. Here's what your historical payables look like. And it's bringing all these things together, not where you've got a screen of like 7,000 things, but it ultimately leads to a recommendation. So that if you're on the phone, you don't have to trust it, but it gives you, guardrails. And increasingly we find that people do trust it, but it's not, hey, we've taken that and you no longer have any visibility to it and it's automated, i.e. it's gone. It's a no. It's still yours, but now we are making it easier to do. We're making you smarter with technology, but you're still the human in the loop. You're still the one who pulls the trigger, right? But now Mr. and Mrs. Senior Broker who knows every pricing in every lane at all times, because there's one of these savants who did make it out of the class of 100. Not everyone on their team is at that point yet, right? And it's like, so now we can enable you and your team to do more loads, because maybe junior reps can take advantage of this and they can be smarter. Maybe not, again, the decision isn't being taken away, but it's being enabled, right? If you do that throughout the entire life cycle of a shipment, the appointment module, if you have a bunch of schedulers, some of the appointments can be automated, right? Some facilities will respond and we can just fully pull that cost out. Sometimes it's not possible. You still need to make a phone call, right? But you now have a tool that is not only like efficiently queuing the appointments you need so you can make more phone calls and more appointments, but you've also got intelligence infused in there that is coaching them what time should the appointment be so as to be able to cover the load at the lowest cost, right? And oftentimes, in my experience, the schedulers in a brokerage are not the most experienced freight people, right? They might not know that a 9 a.m. delivery appointment is much better than a 9 p.m. delivery appointment, or some of the subtleties in there. So you use technology and information to guide them to the right solution, and it makes them able to do more, and it makes the quality of the individual decisions higher. And when you're doing this at the sort of volume of decision making that a brokerage needs, if on 40% of decisions you do 30% better over the course of a year, like that's going to have a very substantial impact on the financial performance of that brokerage.
I mean, I'm going to just let everybody know, Drew didn't pay me to say this, but I truly think what you have right here is what has been missing from the market, Drew, because there's a lot of different technology that's out there that's promising the world for a lot of businesses. And I think the main benefit, and I've been saying this often, and as the kids say, I have receipts, so you can go back to old podcasts of mine and listen to this. I say the best technology comes from the industry. And that's not to say that outsiders can't come in and create good technology, but literally, if you guys go back and rewind and re-listen to what Drew said, what he's talking about there is literal pain points that you face inside of your business. And I know everybody who brokers that's listening to this is going to be like, holy shit, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Drew's got that. Because man, you talk about pricing, for example, there. I think, the biggest issue, for a lot of sales reps is like, man, I don't want to take vacation. How do I know that they're going to price it right? Or, we're going to do this. What's going to go on with my customers? And, they're all out there working. Like what you're describing right there, it brings that experienced rep. Because that's the thing, man. Like that's the biggest disconnect is how do you get that person who's been doing this for 15 years to stop and show the person who's fresh out of the training class, hey, this is how it's done and here's why. Now it's like you have modules that they can go in and they can learn this stuff. They can learn the why behind it. Because, again, you brought up the appointment times, 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. Most of these fuckers are out there, man. And they're like, oh, just take the appointment. Just schedule the appointment. Why would you take that? Again, nobody took the time to tell them the importance of that stuff. So it's like, this is the blocking and tackling of freight that will never go away, because there's always going to be technology. There's always going to be something that's going to come in and do this and do that. But those are the bare bones fundamentals that will never go away from this industry. They never will, because that is what customers look for. Again, I've never had a customer, I might be, the only one, but I've never had a customer sit down and be like, hey, why don't you tell me about your tech stack and everything else? They're like, can you actually move my freight? Can it pick up on time and deliver on time? And can you do it the way that we need it done? That's like the overwhelming response that I get out there in the market. But again, like when earlier in the episode, when I said selling's the easy part, you guys, what Drew just described is what I mean. Selling's the easy part, because it's when your number's called, when it's, hey, come pick this up and take care of this right now, that's when you need to show up.
I couldn't say it any better, man. I firstly, I appreciate the compliment, and I like it for what it's worth. Like, it's not magic, right? Like, it just, we happen to be very, I think, at least unique in that we didn't build it in a vacuum, right? Like, we built it alongside the brokerage, right? Like, I literally, I can tell these stories because they're real and they're shit we encountered along the way. And it's like, well, we just happen to be fortunate that we have a team of 120 of the smartest engineers in the world. And so when we come across these problems, like we literally called it the Freight Lab. We have people who know how to move freight the best in the world, and we have people who know how to solve problems the best in the world. And we literally built these tools alongside the real world problems. And it wasn't, like, oh, we're just going to design this like grandiose theoretical thing in a bag, and then we're going to come in and save the day and take everything you're doing and throw it in the bin, and here comes our solution. Like, that's crazy. That's not how the world works, right? Like, we want to help people with real tools. So I'll tell you a funny story. So Jonathan, our CEO, my partner, is like me, but different in that we're both big dorks. And one of his dorky manifestations is that he's a huge Marvel fan. So in the very early days of our company, every technology component had a Marvel code name. And the core platform was called Stark, for Tony Stark, right? And like, that is the idea of the platform. It's the Iron Man suit for you as a broker. It's not, we're not a robot. You're not going away. We're giving you this armament to be the best broker you can possibly be. And if you're the owner of said brokerage, we want to make your entire team an army of enhanced killers, because they have all of these tools. And I'm going to let this metaphor go in a minute, but like, if you're one of those soldiers, right, like, who again is earning their salary, it's influenced by their performance, right, which is to say commission based, right? Well, then this is great for you too, right? Because you can just do more. And again, it depends on like which thing you want to start with, how it impacts it. Again, but the modules exist throughout the life cycle of the shipment, right? And if somebody works with us in like a truly robust way and implements all of them, it's like, oh, now you're really cooking with grease here, right? And I don't know of too many other companies or products that were sort of built in that way, right? And that's perhaps why we're in this position to sort of uniquely add value to our customers.
I love it, man. Well, Drew, I appreciate your time. I really do, man. And how does anybody reach out to you guys to find out more about what you guys got going on?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty easy to find, Chris. Our website is transfix.io. We're active on most socials. I think LinkedIn is probably the one we're most active on, but you can find us on X, and you can find us on Facebook and things like that as well. But like, listen, we're really open, and this is all pretty new to us, right? As we talked about earlier, this is a little bit of a change from our historical approach to the market, and we're obviously very excited about it, but we're eager to have as many conversations as we can. So to the extent that somebody finds this interesting or not, if they think this is really stupid and they want to yell at me, like, I'm open to that too, right? Like we just want to chat with folks, because again, historically we've been competing with a lot of these folks, and not anymore, right? And so like we want to extend, the olive branch is not the right word. We want to, extend our hand in friendship. Like, hi, how's it going, right? And so we'd love to meet everybody and chat and listen, explore in a very low pressure kind of way, if there's a way to work together. Because frankly, we're very, like, so far, right? Knock on wood, like I said earlier, the momentum has been really, really good. The response we've gotten has been, genuinely super exciting for us. And so I promise there's no hard sells around here. Like, we're not, like, it either is a good fit and there's an opportunity to work together, or there's not. And that's okay too, right? Like, we can both learn, and that's the way we're approaching things. So to the extent that anybody wants to have a conversation, please come find us, because we're available.
I love it. Drew, thank you so much for your time. And for some reason, if you guys can't find Drew or Transfix out there, hit me up. I will gladly put you guys in direct contact with him. But this was actually, I can't believe this episode went as fast as it did. And I know you guys got value, because this was intense. It was very tactical on what you guys need to do out there. And you guys need to hit up Drew. You guys need to hit up Transfix. And if you made it this far and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. Share it out there to your network, because if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.
Right that the earth is mine. Burn bright, let the ember shine. You know I'm gonna get it every time. Champion, wearing the crown. I can see my name in lights. Spark from the heart and it shines so bright. Yeah, let the whole world know. Let's go, let's go.